Stephanie White, Caitlin Clark, little interaction here that seems like Caitlin Clark wasn't too happy with whatever was going on between her and the coaching staff tonight. You got Stephanie White doing the yapping that she does. Caitlin Clark doesn't want to hear it. Physically cringing. Look at this. Physically cringing, looking physically ill.
There are moments in sports history that transcend the box score and redefine an entire organization in a matter of seconds. When the arena lights are burning bright and millions of fans are watching every single breath you take, the pressure inside the building becomes almost suffocating. Nobody expected the dynamic between Indiana's young superstar and her newly appointed head coach to explode into public view this early in their journey together. But what went down on the sideline during a high-stakes broadcast left the entire stadium in a shocked, dead silence. It wasn't just a simple substitution or a routine strategy meeting during a brief timeout. It was a high-voltage confrontation between the most famous basketball player on the planet and a stern head coach who refuses to compromise her principles for anyone. The exact moment Caitlin Clark turned her back, rolled her eyes, and walked away from the huddle while Stephanie White was still speaking, everyone watching knew a permanent line had been crossed. To understand why this sudden breakdown happened on live national television, you have to look past the box score and dive into the weeks of mounting pressure, tactical clashes, and ego battles that had been brewing behind closed doors. The expectations surrounding the Indiana Fever entering this season were unlike anything the league had ever witnessed in its history. Coming off a transformative rookie campaign that smashed viewership records and filled arenas across the country, Caitlin Clark was positioned as the undisputed face of modern women's basketball. But the front office made a dramatic shift during the offseason, parting ways with former coach Christy Sides to bring in Stephanie White, a proven basketball mind with a championship resume and a hard-nosed, relentless philosophy. White was brought in to instill elite defensive discipline, reduce costly turnovers, and build a championship-caliber system capable of winning in the postseason. From day one, basketball purists warned that putting a young, ultra-confident floor general together with a rigid, authoritarian head coach could lead to immediate fireworks. Caitlin thrives on pure freedom, lightning-fast decision-making, and pushing the tempo to absolute extremes, often taking high-risk shots that leave traditional coaches pulling their hair out. Stephanie White, on the other hand, demands absolute control over execution, precise execution in half-court sets, and immediate accountability on defensive rotations. The stage was set for a classic clash between modern player empowerment and traditional coaching authority, and it didn't take long for the match to ignite the powder keg. The game started with an eerie, uncomfortable tension that everyone inside the arena could feel from the moment the ball was tipped into the air. Caitlin was pressing hard from the very first possession, trying to jumpstart the offense with full-court hit-ahead passes and deep pull-up jumpers from near the logo. But the opposing defense was blitzing her at half-court, trapping her on pick-and-rolls, and forcing her into tight spaces. Instead of flowing smoothly, the offense looked completely disjointed, with teammates looking confused about spacing and running into each other during key sets. On the sideline, Stephanie White stood with her arms tightly crossed, pacing the coaching box with a look of pure irritation on her face. Every time Caitlin tried to push the pace against the tactical call from the bench, White would shake her head and yell out play numbers, visibly frustrating her star guard. You could see Caitlin talking back toward the bench while sprinting down the court, waving her hand in frustration after broken plays. The situation was rapidly deteriorating, but nobody expected the head coach to pull the trigger on a drastic move in the middle of a tight, contested quarter. The boiling point arrived midway through the second quarter, after a devastating sequence of back-to-back empty possessions that sent the coaching staff into a tailspin. Caitlin tried to thread a needle-threading pass through three defenders in traffic, leading to an easy steal and a fast break layup for the opposing team. On the very next possession, frustrated by an uncalled foul on the drive, Caitlin picked up a technical foul for yelling directly into the face of an official instead of running back on defense. That was the absolute last straw for Stephanie White, who slapped her clipboard down on her chair and signaled an immediate substitution horn before the ball was even back in play. The horn reverberated through the arena, and the gesture was unmistakable as the head coach motioned for Caitlin to come off the floor right away. The crowd gasped in collective shock because seeing the league's biggest attraction pulled from the game in a disciplinary benching was virtually unprecedented. As Caitlin stomped toward the sideline, her face was bright red with anger, chewing violently on her mouthguard and muttering under her breath as the cameras tracked every single step. What happened the moment Caitlin reached the bench turned a routine coaching decision into a viral firestorm that dominated national sports headlines for days. Stephanie White stepped right up to the sideline boundary, getting close to deliver a stern, aggressive earful about defensive transition, ball security, and composure. But instead of nodding, listening to her coach, or standing with her teammates in the huddle, Caitlin completely snapped. She threw her hands up in utter disbelief, turned her back on Stephanie White while she was mid-sentence, and walked away from the huddle entirely. She bypassed the coaching staff, walked right past her stunned teammates, and marched down toward the tunnel area near the locker room. The entire bench stood completely frozen in shock, not knowing whether to run after their star player or pretend the incident wasn't happening in front of millions of viewers. Stephanie White stood on the court floor with her jaw dropped, staring down the tunnel with an expression that said everything you needed to know about the state of their relationship. The camera crew immediately locked onto Caitlin as she stood alone near the tunnel entrance, refusing to join the bench or wear her warm-up jacket during the remainder of the timeout. The broadcast commentators fell dead silent for a few awkward seconds before trying to process the magnitude of what had just unfolded on live television. Within seconds of the incident occurring, short clips of the confrontation were clipped, uploaded, and trending across every social media platform on Earth. Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram exploded with hot takes, body language analysis, and heated arguments from fans and analysts alike. Lip-reading sleuths on the internet immediately began analyzing the high-definition footage, claiming Stephanie White told Caitlin that she was not above the team standards and needed to sit down and listen. Others claimed Caitlin shouted back that the system was broken and wasn't allowing the team to play fast enough to win games. Regardless of the exact words exchanged, the visual image of a franchise icon walking away from her head coach mid-game blew the doors off the organization's carefully crafted public relations image. When the game resumed after the commercial break, the atmosphere inside the building was unbelievably awkward and tense. Caitlin was finally shown sitting on the far end of the bench structure, completely isolated from the rest of the coaching staff, with a towel draped heavily over her head. She didn't participate in high fives during timeouts. She didn't look at the tactical whiteboard, and she completely ignored the assistant coaches who tried to lean in and offer words of encouragement. Meanwhile, Stephanie White stalked the sideline with an icy, unforgiving posture, directing the 4 remaining players on the floor while refusing to turn around and look at her benched superstar. The crowd began chanting Caitlin's name loudly, demanding that the head coach put the fan favorite back into the action to save the game. But White held her ground, leaving Caitlin on the bench for the remainder of the quarter to prove a point about authority, respect, and organizational hierarchy. It was a cold, calculated power move designed to establish who runs the basketball team, but it carried colossal risks for the franchise's long-term future. When Stephanie White finally motioned for Caitlin to re-enter the contest late in the second half, the energy in the arena reached a fever pitch. Caitlin checked back into the game without looking at the coaching box, stepping onto the floor with a dark, vengeful intensity in her eyes. She played the remainder of the fourth quarter with an aggressive, almost angry play style, firing deep pull-up shots from well beyond the three-point line and driving violently into the paint against heavy contact. Every time she scored, she kept her head down, refusing to celebrate with the bench or look toward the coaching staff for play calls. She was essentially running her own offense out on the court, ignoring the set plays called from the sideline, and using her pure talent to force the team back into the game. While her individual scoring numbers exploded in the final minutes, the overall team chemistry looked completely shattered, with teammates looking uncertain about where to position themselves during her solo runs. When the final buzzer sounded, signaling a tense and uncomfortable conclusion to the contest, Caitlin didn't stay on the court for a single second. She didn't shake hands with the opposing players, she didn't wave to the thousands of young fans wearing her jersey, and she completely ignored the post-game broadcast interview request. She sprinted straight down the tunnel into the locker room, before the coaching staff or her teammates even stepped off the playing floor. The media contingent rushed to the press conference room, knowing that the post-game interviews would be an absolute battlefield of questions regarding the sideline meltdown. Every single reporter in the building had their laptops ready and recorders out, waiting to see how the coach and the superstar would address the giant elephant in the room. The atmosphere in the press room was electric with anticipation, and when Stephanie White finally stepped up to the podium, you could hear a pin drop in the room. When Stephanie White took the microphone, she maintained a stone-cold, businesslike demeanor that refused to yield an inch to the media circus. When reporters immediately pressed her on the benching and the visual confrontation on the sideline, White didn't back down or make excuses for her star player. She stated firmly that internal standards apply to every single player wearing the uniform, regardless of their status, contract size, or fame. She emphasized that turnovers, emotional outbursts, and defensive lapses will not be tolerated if the organization wants to build a sustainable championship culture. When asked specifically about Caitlin turning her back and walking away from the huddle mid-game, White gave a brief, terrifyingly cold response, stating that player conduct is handled internally and walked off the stage. Her refusal to sugarcoat the situation or protect Caitlin from criticism sent shockwaves through the sports media landscape, signaling that this was an all-out battle for control of the locker room. A few minutes later, Caitlin entered the press room looking exhausted, angry, and completely drained by the ordeal. Sitting under the harsh lights of the press room, she kept her answers extremely short, monotone, and defensive, while staring straight ahead at the table. When asked about walking away from her coach during the timeout, Caitlin brushed it off as heat-of-the-moment competitiveness, claiming that everyone involved wants to win, and emotions naturally run high during tough games. But when reporters asked if she agreed with the benching or felt supported by the coaching staff's tactical system, her body language told a completely different story. She gave brief, one-word answers, avoided giving any praise to the coaching staff, and made it crystal clear that she felt restricted by the slow-paced, micromanaged offense being enforced from the sideline. The interview ended abruptly after just a few minutes, leaving reporters with no doubt that a massive rift was dividing the organization from top to bottom. In the days following the game, national sports television networks and top sports podcasts dedicated hours of coverage to analyzing the fallout of the incident. Major sports analysts were deeply divided on who was truly at fault for the public meltdown that embarrassed the franchise. Old-school analysts and former players lined up behind Stephanie White, arguing that no player, no matter how famous or talented, should ever disrespect their head coach on national television. They argued that if a coach loses authority over their superstar, they lose the entire locker room, and team discipline completely collapses. On the flip side, modern media figures and hyper-loyal fans fiercely defended Caitlin, claiming that a generational talent who single-handedly elevated the entire league should never be publicly humiliated by a coach's ego. They pointed out that forcing a superstar driver to play in a slow, restrictive system is tactical suicide, and that the organization should cater to Caitlin's unique strengths rather than trying to break her spirit. Behind closed doors, rumors began circulating from league insiders that the tension inside the locker room was reaching an all-time high. Unverified reports suggested that veteran players on the team were feeling caught in an impossible situation between supporting their head coach's standards and staying on good terms with the franchise cornerstone. Some veterans reportedly appreciated White's insistence on accountability, feeling that previous coaching regimes had given Caitlin a free pass for reckless play and defensive mistakes. However, other players were concerned that the public drama and tension were destroying team morale and making the environment toxic to play in. Front office executives were reportedly holding emergency meetings to figure out how to manage the crisis before it impacted sponsor relationships, season ticket renewals, and team performance on the court. When a franchise invests millions of dollars and its entire future into a single generational asset, a fallout between the star player and the coach becomes an existential threat to the entire business model. To truly grasp the severity of this situation, you have to look at historical precedents, where generational superstars clashed violently with authoritarian head coaches early in their careers. We saw similar explosive dynamics play out between legendary figures like Phil Jackson and Kobe Bryant, Eric Spoelstra and LeBron James, or Doug Collins and Michael Jordan. Great championship coaches understand that elite, hyper-competitive athletes possess an obsessive drive to win that often manifests as intense frustration when things aren't going well. The fire, confidence, and absolute defiance that make players like Caitlin Clark extraordinary on the court are the exact same traits that make them incredibly difficult to manage from the bench. The true test of a championship head coach isn't asserting total dominance or breaking a superstar's spirit. It's learning how to channel that explosive, competitive rage into a structured winning formula without destroying the player's natural instincts. If Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark can find a way to compromise and respect each other's vision, this explosive incident could eventually be looked back on as the painful birth of a legendary championship dynasty. However, if neither side is willing to swallow their pride and make tactical concessions, the consequences for the Indiana Fever could be completely catastrophic. In today's modern sports era, player empowerment gives transcendent superstars unprecedented leverage over franchise decisions, roster construction, and coaching hires. If a superstar player feels that a head coach is actively hindering their growth, enjoyment, or success, history shows that the coach is almost always the one who gets pushed out the door first. On the other hand, if an organization repeatedly fires head coaches to appease a young player, it creates a dangerous culture where no coach can ever establish true authority or discipline. The front office finds itself walking a razor-thin tightrope, trying to balance the long-term authority of their head coach with the happiness and freedom of the biggest icon the sport has ever seen. The corporate sponsors, league executives, and millions of fans around the world are watching closely to see which direction the organization will swing. As the team prepares for their upcoming road schedule and another slate of nationally televised games, every single detail on the Indiana bench will be dissected like never before. Body language experts, camera operators, and rival teams will be watching every timeout, every substitution, and every subtle interaction between Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White. Will the head coach compromise her rigid principles and give her star floor general the keys to run a high-speed, unstructured offense that unleashes her full potential? Or will Caitlin adjust her mindset, embrace the defensive intensity and half-court discipline demanded by her coach, and show the world that she can win within any system? One thing is absolutely certain: the fireworks on the sideline are far from over, and how this high-stakes power struggle resolves will shape the future of the Indiana Fever, the WNBA, and the legacy of Caitlin Clark forever.